Excellent. Well, it's wonderful to be back here. It's been a couple years. I think I was coming here annually, and then suddenly I guess I got too busy, and it has been a couple years since I've been here. So it's wonderful to be back, and there's lots of new faces I can see since I was here. I wanted to begin by having you imagine something for a moment. I want you to imagine that you are huddled away in darkness. I want you to imagine that you're in a very small space, that you are invisible to the rest of the world. You're entirely dependent on someone else for your survival, and you need a long cord that provides you food and nourishment for the necessities of life. Now, who do you think I'm talking about?
Unborn child.
The unborn child. I am not. I'm actually talking about these 33 men. Who are they? They are the Chilean miners who, on August 5th, as they were deep underground in their mine, 700,000 tons of rock collapsed on the mine that they were in. They were trapped 600 meters below the surface. And they were there for 69 days before they were rescued. Now, in some sense, the experience of these 33 miners is like the experience of the preborn child. They even had to go through a very narrow passage to get to the surface. And unlike birth, where parents wait in great anticipation at the arrival of their children, children were waiting the arrival of their parents, shedding tears of joy. Now, can you imagine for a moment if we had abandoned these miners in their time of crisis? Can you imagine if in not only abandoning these miners in their time of crisis, but that we actually purposefully killed them? Now, we can't really fathom that or imagine that because it goes against our human nature to kill our fellow human beings. We would be horrified at such an idea. Such an idea in our minds would be unthinkable. And yet the idea of attacking those who are very dependent on others is something that is very thinkable when it comes to the preborn child. How many people in our society today look at the dependency of the preborn child, the need for that child to rely on the help of other people as grounds to end that child's life, rather than as grounds to protect and respect that child's life, as we protected and respected the lives of the miners? Now, our society would never think of abandoning or killing those miners because we recognize them as valuable human beings. And in my experience, when I make analogies or comparisons to the preborn child, from the preborn child to born people like the miners, people who support abortion often say such an analogy is flawed because the people in the mine in Chile were valuable human beings, whereas fetuses, they would say, are potential people. They're not humans like the rest of us. And so I would say as a pro-life movement, when it comes to convincing our society that abortion is unthinkable, and that abortion is a great wrong as abandoning those miners would have been a great wrong. In order to get to that way of thinking in society, we need to convince people that the preborn child is a valuable human person like those miners are valuable human beings. So what I want to do this afternoon is equip you with how I have found we can best defend the pro-life view when it comes to convincing people that the preborn child is a human person just like you and me. After I make the case for the personhood and the humanity of the preborn child, what I'm going to do is talk about certain approaches that I have found very helpful when dialoguing with people in a persuasive way, and how if you take these approaches to heart, you will also find your conversations with people on abortion to be effective. And then we'll open it up to questions. Now, before I get to the part where I want to equip you to be able to prove that the preborn are human, I want to address an objection I sometimes hear, and that is, sometimes people say who support abortion that determining whether abortion is right or wrong is not based on figuring out whether the preborn are human like the rest of us. But instead, people who support abortion will say, we determine whether abortion is right or wrong by looking at the individual circumstances a pregnant girl is in. And if the circumstances are difficult enough, then in those cases, abortion is justified. If the circumstances aren't very difficult, then abortion isn't justified. So people who support abortion often determine its morality on a case-by-case basis. They say it's not black and white, it's very gray. Whereas as pro-lifers, we argue the morality of abortion is a black and white issue. It's as simple as determining, are the preborn humans? Now, in order to illustrate how central that question is, I'd like you to help me please brainstorm. What are some of the difficult circumstances a pregnant girl or woman could be in that would prompt some abortion advocates to say abortion's justified in that case? What are some of those cases or circumstances? Yes?
Worst case if it's dangerous for the mother to continue.
Okay, so if the woman's life is in danger, what other circumstances are given?
Rape.
Rape, if she's conceived as a result of sexual assault. What else?
There's a severe disability, like
Okay.
Parkinson.
The child is disabled in some way. Yes.
No money.
No money. She's poor. Any other circumstances? Yes.
High school pregnancy.
High school, too young. Every time I speak to teenagers, it's the first point they raise their hand and say, too young, too young. Now, as a result of these many and varied circumstances, this is why abortion supporters will say the debate is very complicated. We have to look at the unique situation of each woman. But in each of these circumstances, we have to ask ourselves, would we ever kill a born human being to address any of these problems? And if we wouldn't kill a born person in these situations, but we would kill the preborn in those situations, then what that means is we don't consider the preborn to be equal to the born, but instead inferior. So the real question is not do these circumstances exist, but whether or not the preborn are equal to us or inferior. Because if they're equal to us, then we can't kill them for these circumstances, just as we wouldn't kill a born person. So for example, take the case of rape. Let's imagine a woman is raped a day after she had sex with her husband. So in a month's time, when she discovers she's pregnant, she doesn't know who the father of the child is. It could be her husband, it could be the rapist. Well, let's say she hopes it's her husband's child. She carries on with the pregnancy, and after the baby is born, a paternity test is done. The results come back and reveal the child's father is not her husband. It's the rapist. So I would say to the abortion supporter, would we allow that woman or anyone to kill the newborn baby because of the father's crime? And what will the abortion supporter say? No, of course not. So then we ask a question. If we can't kill the newborn child because of the father's crime, how come we can kill the preborn child because of the father's crime? Any ideas about what the abortion advocate will say in response? That's different, they'll say. Fetuses aren't the same as infants. Infants are people. Fetuses aren't. If that's the reaction, then we say the question and the issue is not rape, but whether fetuses are people like infants are people. You know, a few years ago, the New York Times interviewed an abortionist by the name of Dr. Wickland. And in this article, it said the following. Dr. Wickland describes her horror when she aborted the pregnancy of a woman who had been raped, only to discover after examining the removed tissue that the pregnancy was further along than she or the woman had thought, and that she just destroyed an embryo the woman and her husband had conceived together. Even the abortionist was horrified at what she had done. But if it's horrifying to kill a child conceived in love, is it not equally horrifying to kill a child conceived in violence? Because in both cases, we're dealing with a child. So that's really the question. Take the circumstance of poverty. We have poverty in our own backyard, and we have poverty in other parts of the world. Do we kill born people to eliminate poverty? Born people who are poor? Obviously not. So we need only ask the abortion supporter, why then kill the preborn child for reasons of poverty? Well, they will say someone starving in Africa is a human person, but a fetus is a potential person. Then once again, the issue is not poverty, but when does life begin? Are the preborn people? Take disability. This is a picture of a little boy I took care of in Romania a couple years ago when I volunteered at a clinic there. And as you may be able to tell, Christy Daniel has Down syndrome. He was a year and a half old when I arrived at the clinic, and he weighed only 14 pounds. I also took care of this little girl, Alina. Alina has fetal alcohol syndrome. She's missing one of her kidneys. She has a bad liver and a bad heart. When I arrived at the clinic, she was 6 months old and weighed only 6 pounds. Now, Christy and Alina are two of the kinds of children that many people would say, because of their disabilities, they should have been aborted. But for anyone who would say that, we need only ask, would we kill them now because of the Down syndrome and the FAS? Would we say, well, there's no difference really if you go to Romania to care for sick children or go to Romania to kill sick children, it really doesn't matter. And of course, abortion advocates, even they would say, well, no, there's a big difference. One is right and one is wrong. Well, if we won't kill born children with these disabilities, why the preborn? Well, again, people will say that's because the preborn aren't people. So the real question then is, how do we define personhood? And do we know when our lives first came into existence? Can we figure that out? So what I want to do is answer that question now of when do our lives begin. We want to answer that by imagining our lives drawn out in a timeline. If we were to take the age of someone, let's say, who's 20 years old, and we were to work backwards to determine when their lives first began, where in that timeline can we mark their beginning point? Well, we know in the case of a 20-year-old that 20 years prior this person was born. That's right. And we know 9 months prior to birth, a process called fertilization or conception occurs. And there are several things scientifically we know about fertilization. The first is that if you have human parents, what comes into existence at fertilization must be of the same species, has to be human as well. And we know that because of the scientific principle that says living things reproduce after their own kind. So dogs produce cats. I'm testing to see if you're paying attention. Dogs produce, cats produce, and humans produce? Excellent. All right. So we know at fertilization, in the case of two human parents, the being at fertilization also has to be human. The next thing we know is that all the genetic information which makes this 20-year-old different from you and me, all of that information was determined not at birth, not 2 months before birth, but was determined at fertilization. The next thing we know is that that being at fertilization, sometimes referred to as a zygote or an embryo, which is just a technical name for that beginning part of its life, the zygote has to be alive. And we know that because of the law of biogenesis, which says living things come from other living things. Now that idea in science was established when the notion of spontaneous generation was disproved. Does anyone know what spontaneous generation was, the idea of it was? Yes?
It was like when it rained, earthworms would appear, and when you drop rice, the mice would come.
So, exactly. People would see non-living things and then living things, and they thought that the living things came from the non-living things. So, like flies over meat. Oh, the flies must have come from the non-living meat. Or the examples you gave, and people are like, no, that's not possible. Life just can't spontaneously come about from non-living matter. Living things have to come from other living things. So that's a well-accepted scientific principle. So for anyone to say the preborn child is not alive, that's just not logical. Now, having said that, if living things come from other living things, then the zygote comes from what? The sperm and the egg, which are living things. So then someone may say, well, are you saying sperm and egg by themselves are equal to zygotes? Well, this next point is very important, and that is at fertilization, we're dealing with a whole being as opposed to a part of a being. Can we tell human sperm from cat sperm? Yes. Can we tell human eggs from dog eggs? Yes. So we can know that the sperm and the egg are human, but they are human parts, not human wholes. They're like my hand or my foot. If my hand was chopped off, we wouldn't say, oh, there's Stephanie over there. We would say, oh, there's Stephanie's hand. How unfortunate. You know, how did that happen? But clearly we would say, well, that's not her as a whole being. That's a part of her. But at fertilization, when the sperm fertilizes the egg, that forms a whole being. Who each of us is today came into existence at that union of the sperm and the egg. And we know that something fundamental happens there, which is different prior to sperm and egg fusion, by looking at how science tells the difference between cell types. When science wants to distinguish how one cell is different from another cell, it looks at two things. It looks at the composition of the cell. In other words, what is the cell made up of? And it looks at the behavior of the cell. In other words, what does the cell do? And by looking at these two things, that's how we can tell at the moment of fertilization that one-celled zygote, that one-celled embryo, is fundamentally different from the sperm cell or from the egg cell. Because the makeup of the egg is to have 23 chromosomes from the mother. The makeup of the sperm is to have 23 chromosomes from the father. But the makeup of the zygote is to have the 23 chromosomes from the mother and the father, typically forming 46 unless there's a genetic problem. But the point is that its very makeup contains both of the material from each of those cells by themselves in one cell, that zygote in that embryo. Even before the chromosomes have intermingled, nonetheless, it's all contained there within that zygote. The other thing is the very behavior of that zygote at the instant of fertilization is different from that of the sperm or the egg. The egg basically waits for the sperm to find it. The sperm is looking to find an egg and fertilize it. But the moment one sperm fertilizes the egg, no other sperm can. So the very behavior of that embryo, of that zygote, is to prevent sperms from fertilizing it, which is very different behavior from eggs by themselves, which are waiting for sperm to fertilize them. So the very makeup and the very activity of the zygote, literally in that instant of fertilization, is different from the makeup and the behavior of the sperm and the egg by themselves. So then the question becomes, from the point of fertilization onwards, does anything change? Only the appearance and the ability of that individual, but not the nature. The nature of each of us occurred in that instant of fertilization. Of course, that is backed up in embryology textbooks that medical students use. These say that our lives as human beings began at fertilization. Now, we all remember Polaroid cameras, yes? All right, even though we're very accustomed to digital cameras. Of course, Polaroid cameras, we know you snap the photo and that little white card comes out. Do you see the image right away? No, there's that brown smudgy stuff, and then you just sort of wave it in the air and wait for the image to form. Well, I want you to imagine that you are where my dad is from. You're in Scotland. And you're in Scotland, and you're in a very famous place known as Loch Ness. Now, what's in Loch Ness? That's right, the Loch Ness Monster. You know, my grandma swears she saw it. So let's say you are on a boat and you're on Loch Ness. Loch means lake, so you're on Lake Ness and you are waiting to see the Loch Ness Monster. Well, lo and behold, you turn to your right and 1 arm's length away, there is Nessie. All those humps are like sticking out of the water. And so you grab the only camera you have, which is a Polaroid camera, and you snap a photo to be able to prove to the world that what some people thought was a myth actually is reality. Now, you have a friend in the boat with you who has never seen a Polaroid camera before. Now, once you snap the photo and the card comes out, Nessie goes underwater, but you're not worried because you have the evidence. Now, your friend who hasn't seen this camera before grabs that picture with enthusiasm and excitement, really happy to see the proof, but doesn't see the proof. All she sees is brown smudges. So she tosses it into the lake and says, "Oh, it didn't take the photo." Now, would you be angry that your friend just threw the photograph into the lake? Yes, why? Because it destroyed it, right? Now imagine you said to your friend, "You just ruined the proof we had to show that the Loch Ness Monster is real." And imagine your friend responded, "Well, there was no picture there, it was just a bunch of brown smudges. What do you care about brown smudges for?" And of course you would reply back, "It wasn't just brown smudges. Everything about the image of the Loch Ness Monster was captured in an instant. It just needed time to develop." And the same is true about each one of us at fertilization. Who we are today is literally captured in that instant of the beginning of the process of fertilization at sperm-egg fusion. It's captured in that instant, and all we need is time to develop. What I want to do now is play for you a phenomenal video clip from this website called the Endowment for Human Development. And this website has a film called The Biology of Prenatal Development, which has video imagery of the preborn child throughout pregnancy. So whereas a lot of fetal development videos have ultrasound imagery of the preborn child or computer-generated graphics of the preborn child, what you are going to see is very rare video footage of the preborn child. This video incorporates what's called embryoscopy and fetoscopy, which was where a little tiny video camera was inserted into the uterus to show us what the life is like for the preborn child. And what's so great about this website is that you can see all the clips from the video online. So you can order the whole video, or you can just watch clips, and the clips are subtitled in 88 languages. So if you have friends in other parts of the world who maybe don't speak English, tell them to go to this website, and then they can share with their friends in their subtitled language the images of the preborn child and the explanation of what's going on. Just a couple weeks ago, I was in Eastern Europe speaking in Riga, Latvia. And who knew that of the 88 languages, one of them was Latvian? And so I was able to play for my audience. The interpreter didn't need to interpret that part because the subtitles were playing. Well, I'm not going to have any subtitles on this clip, but you are going to see some amazing footage.
A touch to the mouth area causes the embryo to reflexively withdraw its head. The external ear is beginning to take shape. By 6 weeks, blood cell formation is underway in the liver, where lymphocytes are now present. This type of white blood cell is a key part of the developing immune system. Hiccups have been observed by 7 weeks. Leg movements can now be seen, along with a startle response. The 4-chambered heart is largely complete. On average, the heart now beats 167 times per minute. Electrical activity of the heart, recorded at 7.5 weeks, reveals a wave pattern similar to the adults. In females, the ovaries are identifiable by 7 weeks. Fingers are separate. And toes are joined only at the bases. The hands can now come together, as can the feet. Knee joints are also present. By 8 weeks, 75% of embryos exhibit right-hand dominance. The remainder is equally divided between left-handed dominance and no preference. This is the earliest evidence of right or left-handed behaviour. Head rotation, neck extension, and hand-to-face contact occur more often. Touching the embryo elicits squinting, jaw movement, grasping motions, and toe pointing. Between 7 and 8 weeks, the upper and lower eyelids rapidly grow over the eyes and partially fuse together. Although there is no air in the uterus, the embryo displays intermittent breathing motions by 8 weeks.
So as you can see, the preborn child is growing and developing very quickly and very phenomenally throughout that early part of pregnancy. When people hear the basic science of when life begins, if they're intellectually honest, they'll have to admit that the preborn are human. So this is what's happening in the abortion debate. People who support abortion are divorcing the concept of human from person, and they're treating them as two separate things. They're saying a human is what you are biologically. Fine, I'll concede that what I just saw is human. It's not a dog, a cat, or a fish. But they'll say, a person is much more than a human. And then when you begin to ask them how they define person, inevitably their definition of person will rely on some feature of an individual, what the individual is able to do or accomplish or looks like. And because the preborn differ from us in some ways, this is how abortion advocates deny them their personhood status. So for example, if you look at the period of time from fertilization to birth, abortion advocates will say, well, there's a difference, the difference of size. The preborn are very small. Why should that be considered a person compared to a grown woman? Well, admittedly, over the first 9 months, size changes. They are smaller than us, although their size does increase. But if you look at the period of time between birth and someone who's 20, what's changed? Also their size, that has increased. So we have to ask ourselves, should our personhood, our value, our right to life, be based on our size or be based on our existence within the human species? My colleague Jojo found a very funny book on parenting, which has a number of pages in it called The Do's and Don'ts of Parenting. It tells parents through images what they should and should not do with their children. And I think some of the sections of this book can illustrate my point that, for example, our personhood should not be based on our size. And this is one of the pages. Now, clearly, we can't exercise infants in a certain way because of their size. Just because we can't exercise them that way and they're smaller than us doesn't mean that they're not people. They're just immature people. Well, in the same way, yes, that preborn child is smaller than a born child. But it doesn't mean the preborn child isn't a person. It means it's an underdeveloped person, just as this toddler is more developed than the preborn child, but far less developed compared to the rest of us. So size shouldn't determine our personhood. The next difference is level of development. Abortion advocates will say, what makes us different from animals? Isn't it that we can think, reason, have complex thoughts? The preborn child can't do that, they may say. That's why it's not a person. But like size, the child's physical, as we saw in the film, and even intellectual development and the ability to feel pain and dream and all of those things, that's something that's going to change over 9 months and become more impressive. Just like after birth, our physical and intellectual development changes as well. So again, we have to ask ourselves, if we define our personhood based on level of development, where do we draw the line? Even after birth, a born child is less developed than a 20-year-old, but it doesn't mean the born child isn't a person. Going back to that book, this is another illustration, and we can see from this example that the intellectual development of a toddler is not enough to be able to play a game of chess, but it doesn't mean the toddler isn't a person. Obviously, even people after birth continue to go through developmental changes, physically going from diapers to being able to go to the bathroom by yourself, and puberty versus not having gone through puberty. But we're still people, even though we're less developed in those immature stages. Well, in the same way, the preborn child is less developed than us, but it doesn't mean that she's not a person. The next difference is environment. At fertilization, the preborn child is in the mother's fallopian tube, then a week later moves into her uterus, and then 9 months later moves into the doctor's arm. So environment changes over 9 months, we can admit that. But look at the time from birth to age and ask yourself, has your external surroundings changed? Well, of course they have. Now we have to ask again, should our personhood be based on what's around us? Obviously not. So clearly there are some environments that born children can't survive in. It doesn't mean that they are not people. My little cousin was born premature and he needed the environment of an incubator. It doesn't mean that he's not a person just because he can't survive in other environments. Well, take the case of my sister. When she was pregnant with my niece Monica, there was a period of time where my niece couldn't survive outside the environment of my sister's womb. But it doesn't mean my niece wasn't a person. All it means is that she was an immature person compared to my sister and compared to me. And the last difference is dependency. Some abortion advocates will deny the preborn their right to life, their personhood status, on the basis that they need their mother's body to survive. Well, they do need their mother's body to survive, at least early in pregnancy, but as pregnancy progresses, their dependency on her goes down. But of course, again, after birth, our dependency tends to go down as well, our dependency on other people. It doesn't mean that we're not people just because we rely on others for our survival more than other people in society. In my work, I travel a lot. I'm frequently on airplanes, and since there's obviously not too much you can do on an airplane, I'm frequently just sitting there thinking. And as I was sitting on one flight a couple years ago on my way from Florida back to Canada, I had been doing some pro-life activities in Florida. I was sitting on the plane, the door was closed, and they announced that we were going to be taking off, and we took off, and I thought to myself, if any environment amongst born people is similar to that of the preborn child, it's people on a plane when the plane is in the sky. Because it's at that point where I and the rest of the passengers are totally dependent on someone else for our survival. And imagine for a moment if after a pilot took the plane off and all the passengers are strapped into their seats and the plane is flying through the air, imagine if the pilot decided he didn't want to fly the plane anymore. And he decided that he would parachute to safety and let the plane crash. Or imagine if the pilot said, I don't want passengers on my plane anymore. Stewardess, go and shoot everyone. Of course, we would be horrified at a pilot even entertaining that idea. Because we recognize with the power to control the destiny of the passengers on the plane comes the responsibility to protect and respect their lives. The fact that we passengers need a pilot in a way, and he has the ability to help us in a way no one else on that plane can take care of us, that doesn't make him less responsible. That makes him more responsible. So when people who support abortion say, well, the preborn child needs its mother's body to survive, we can say, you know what, you're right. But by making that claim, you've just made a case against abortion, not a case for abortion. Because the fact that the preborn child needs its mother in a unique way, and only she can help the child, means she is more responsible, not less. In the same way pilots of planes are more responsible, not less. And the idea of a pilot being responsible for his passengers became very clear and was very well lived out a couple years ago when a flight in the United States was hit by none other than Canadian geese. And that caused that plane to have to make an emergency landing. And the pilot of that plane, Sully, had to make a decision about how he was going to land this plane, knowing that he couldn't get back to the airport on time. And he had to choose between crashing into buildings in New York and killing everyone, in the plane as well as those outside of it, or doing his best to land the plane as safely as possible on the Hudson River. And he did, and as they tell you when they go through all the emergency procedures when a plane takes off, the doors were opened up, those little floaty slide things came out, and people began to exit the plane. But of course, the plane is on water, the doors are open. What's happening? Water begins to fill the cabin. So people are rushing to get out of the plane, but who's staying on the plane? The pilot. And he walked the aisle twice as water was filling to make sure no one was left inside. And he was the last person to get off that plane. With power comes responsibility. And with the power of a woman to control the very destiny of her preborn child's life comes the responsibility to protect, as I said earlier, and to respect that child's life. Earlier this year, I was speaking to a group of grade 7 students about abortion. I had a more simplistic presentation to talk to them about life in the womb and get a sense from them as to what abortion is. And I began my talk by saying to these students, I want you to imagine that I am an alien from another planet who has come to Earth for the first time. And as I encounter you Earthlings, I hear you talking about people. And I don't know what people are. So I say to you Earthlings, what's a person? Now, how would you describe and define for me, the alien, what a person is? And this one student raised his hand and he says, well, a person is someone with 2 arms and 2 legs. I said, really? Well, there's a guy from Australia by the name of Nick Vujicic. He was born without arms and legs. Is he a person? I asked these students. Yes, they all said. Well, then our definition of person can't be someone with 2 arms and 2 legs. So what's the definition? So another student raised his hand. He says, well, a person is someone with feelings, someone who can feel things. I said, really? There's a little girl in the United States by the name of Gabby Gingras. She has a very rare condition where she can't feel pain. As a baby, she bit her fingers until they bled and chewed her tongue like it was bubble gum. And she never felt pain to tell her to stop doing those things. Is little Gabby Gingras a person? I asked these grade 7 students, and they all nodded. Yes, she's a person. Well, then what's the definition of a person? The alien in me asked. And these little Earthlings said, as one girl raised her hand, well, a person is someone who can think and someone who can talk. Really? I said, well, when my little nephew Francis was born, he couldn't think or talk. Now, when he was a newborn child, was he a person? Yes, they all agreed. So we were really struggling to come up with a definition of a person that didn't exclude someone that we all recognized to be a valuable person. Well, one day I asked my niece Monica what a person is, and I'd like to play for you what her response was.
Hey Monica, what's a person?
No matter a person no matter how small.
That's brilliant. Who taught you that?
Mommy told the person here the crew.
That's right. Are you a person?
No.
You're not?
I'm a girl.
Are girls not people? Are boys people?
No.
Well, then who's a person?
You.
Now, if if I'm a person, but girls aren't people, well then the logic of my niece concludes that I am not a girl. So clearly, like these grade 7 students, my niece is very confused as to how to define a person. Well, I continued to ask this group of students what a person is, and this one girl in the class was like waving her arm. You could tell she was really frustrated, trying to get my attention. So I finally let her speak. I pointed to her and I said, "How would you define a person?" And she goes, "Look, it's really easy to figure out if someone is of the species Homo sapiens. And if they are, then they're a person." And I said, "Can I take you to universities with me?" But indeed, this girl in grade 7 is correct. If we acknowledge someone by virtue of being a human within our species to be a person, everyone's safe. If we define personhood based on what we look like and what we're able to do and how well we can think and how strong and independent we are, inevitably someone always gets left out. In fact, if you look at history, where the word person was used, it was often used to define certain people out of existence in terms of their right to life. There was a time where personhood was not based on being born, but based on the color of your skin. And if you were black, you could be enslaved, societies in the United States, in Britain, and other places, because they said you're not a person because of the color of your skin. In America, Native Americans were classified, legally classified as non-persons. Of course, women were once classified as non-persons. So we see this term person being defined by skin color, then being defined by culture, ethnicity, then being defined by sex, whether you're male or female, and then during the time of the Holocaust, Jews were classified as non-persons. So then we see personhood being defined by your religion or your culture. In each of these cases, we see when you define person as something other than existing as a human being, someone always gets hurt. Now today, when it comes to the preborn child, if we ask ourselves, why is the child smaller than us? Why is she less developed? Why can't she think like we can? Why does she need her mother's body? And the answer is because she's younger than us. She's less developed because she's younger. A 2-year-old needs her mother the way we don't need our mother or some caregiver because the 2-year-old is younger. Should our personhood be defined by our age? Of course not. And so I would say that abortion ultimately boils down to age discrimination. And if it's wrong for white people to kill darker people, why would we ever say it's okay for older people to kill younger people? What I want to do now is talk about certain approaches that we can take when dialoguing with people about abortion to communicate what I've just shared with you in an actual conversation, not just a presentation. Because if you encounter people who say, well, why is abortion wrong? They're not necessarily going to sit and listen to you as politely as you've sat and listened to me. There'll be some give and take and back and forth. And so in the many conversations I've had with people about abortion, I have found the following approaches to be very helpful. The first is to illustrate the point you're making. A picture is worth 1,000 words, right? We are a visual culture, and we will often forget what we've heard, but very often remember what we've seen. And so how do we illustrate our point with people we're talking to in a way that helps them remember everything? Well, that timeline that I drew and that SLED acronym and all those facts, drawing that out and asking them where they would draw the line. Having that visual image there, that will help your conversation. But the question, what are the preborn? When does life begin? Is answered by that visual illustration. But that visual illustration doesn't answer the question, what is abortion? What is that procedure that occurs 100,000 times a year in Canada, 1 million times a year in the United States, and 42 million times a year throughout the world? What is that procedure? Well, my colleague Ray Cunningham has said, some acts are so horrific that words fail us when we try to convey their true horror. So in a few moments, to illustrate my point of the wrongness of abortion by providing a tool that you can use to illustrate to people you know, family members, friends, to people you know that abortion is wrong, to prove to people that abortion kills a child, I'm going to play for you a film that you can use as a tool to answer the question, what is abortion? And it's helpful to keep in mind that lots of campaigns make use of images to get their message across when they know words aren't sufficient. So for example, this is a picture of a woman named Jacqueline Saborito who in around 1999 was hit by a drunk driver. She didn't get killed in the car accident, but a fire did break out, and Jacqueline was severely disfigured. Just as anti-drinking and driving campaigns recognize the need to show the victims of drinking and driving accidents, so too when it comes to abortion, we need to show the victims of abortion. This is an image that may be familiar to some of you. Time magazine just a few months ago had on its front cover this picture of a woman by the name of Aisha. Aisha's nose and ears were cut off by the Taliban. And they were cut off because Aisha ran away from her family, from her in-laws. She ran away from her in-laws because they treated her so badly she feared that they would kill her. Well, after running away, Aisha was found, and the Taliban ordered her family to cut her nose and ears off. And we can just hear the description of what happened, but it's not until we see it that we have a deeper understanding of just how wrong that action is, and just how her dignity was violated by that act of injustice. I recently saw a phenomenal movie that I highly recommend. It's in theaters, and it's called Conviction. Has anyone heard of it or seen the trailer? So good. Hilary Swank plays the actress, and it's based on the true story of a man who, in around 1980, was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. He was not guilty. And for 18 years afterwards, his sister fought to free her brother. And she had not even completed high school, even though she was an adult. She lived a very rough life, very challenging time, so she hadn't finished her high school. She went back and finished her high school. She got into university and did an undergraduate degree. Then she got into law school and became a lawyer so that she could have one client, her brother, so that she could set him free. And when she became a lawyer, what did Betty Ann do? She sought to find the evidence, the DNA evidence that had been kept in storage for years. She sought to get the evidence and then provide it to prove that her brother was innocent and should be released. At the end of that movie, I'd gone with my colleagues, and my one colleague said, well, now do we all need to go to law school and become lawyers? And I said, you know what? We already are lawyers in the courtroom of public opinion. And as Betty Ann amassed the evidence and made it known to the powers that be that her brother was innocent, we as pro-lifers need to amass the evidence of the humanity of the preborn child and the inhumane nature of abortion in order to make our case that abortion is a moral wrong, not a woman's right. So on that note, I'm going to play this film about abortion. A friend of mine, some of you may have heard of her, Lila Rose. She's gone undercover at Planned Parenthood in order to expose a number of things that they do unethically, obviously besides killing children, the most unethical thing they do. And Lila put together a powerful graphic film about abortion called Here's the Blood that's available on the internet. And prior to playing this film, I just want to make the final point that in condemning the action of abortion, I'm not condemning the actors, people who have been involved with abortion. Having just come back from Eastern Europe, where it's not uncommon for women there to have 8, 9, and 10 abortions each, I'm very aware of the pain that abortion has brought to so many people's lives. And in communicating how wrong abortion is, it is essential we also communicate how forgiving God is. Now, some people may say, well, if you believe in forgiveness and mercy and you're not condemning women, why show pictures that will inevitably make a post-abortive person feel bad? My answer is, you cannot have love without truth. If we love people, then that means we share truth messages with them that will set them free.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created
colleague Greg Cunningham has said, injustice that is invisible inevitably becomes tolerable. And our society and people within our churches are tolerating what we just saw because it's invisible, because it is hidden behind the closed doors of abortion clinics and hospitals, because it is hidden behind words like choice and freedom and rights, and all that sounds good. And so for injustice to become intolerable, it must be made visible. We must bring what's in darkness, which Satan wants to keep in darkness, into the light, so that the scales fall off people's eyes. They realize the injustice of abortion and come to bring it to an end. So when it comes to dialoguing with people and making sure we communicate persuasively to them, pictures and illustrating our point, whether with graphic images, fetal development imagery, or the timeline I shared with you, that's one way to persuade people. Another way to help people come to the pro-life perspective is to ask questions. When we ask questions, we tell the person indirectly, who we're talking to, that we're interested in what they think, that we're willing to hear them out. And when we ask questions, we're also able to expose through their own discussions with their own answers how there's problems and inconsistencies with their beliefs. There's an abortionist here in British Columbia who performed an abortion on a woman because she felt her pregnancy interfered with a planned trip she had to Hawaii. Now, most abortion advocates I talk to are very uncomfortable with that. But what I always say back to them is a question. Why? Why would you object to a woman having an abortion because she wanted to go on vacation? Because if there's nothing wrong with abortion, having it because you want to go on holiday shouldn't make a difference. But if we naturally are horrified at people aborting because they're going on holiday, and the reason being because they kill their child to go on vacation, then maybe any abortion would kill a child, and therefore we should be opposed to all abortions. Or if you hear someone say, I think I support abortion, but we need to reduce the need for it. Now, oftentimes these people are the people that say abortion is a woman's right. Well, if it's a woman's right, why would we want to reduce it? Again, we're going to ask a question, why? Why decrease the need for it if not only there's nothing wrong with it, but in fact there's a good thing about it? I once debated a philosophy professor a couple years ago, and he made an argument that was different from the arguments that I've presented to you this evening. He said, I'm going to concede for this discussion that a preborn child is a human person like everyone else, that it's fully a person with the same moral standing as you and me. But he says, I'm going to make the case for how abortion is justified. He said, just because you're a human person, it doesn't mean you have a right to other people's body parts to live. He said, imagine if you have a child and your child needs a kidney transplant, and you have a kidney that you can give and it won't kill you to give that kidney. Would it be nice of you to give your kidney? Of course. But should the law force you to give your kidney to your child? And he said, no. And just as the law should not force a mother or father to give their kidney to a child, even if the preborn child is just that, a child, a human person like the rest of us, the woman shouldn't be forced to give her uterus to it. So how do we respond to that? Well, we ask a question. What is the nature and purpose of the kidneys versus the nature and purpose of the uterus? The kidneys exist in a body for the body that they're in. The uterus exists in a body and then around a body. I can live without my uterus, but a baby cannot. Every month, a woman's body is getting ready for someone else's body. And so we ask the question to the people we talk to, what is the nature and purpose of the kidney versus the nature and purpose of the uterus, in order to make the point that you aren't obligated to give your kidney to your child, but you are obligated, the woman, to give her uterus to the child. Because the uterus is an organ in my body different from all the others. It exists for my offspring, and they have a right to that in a way they don't have a right to my kidney. So we want to illustrate our point. We want to ask questions. I have just a few more moments before I want to open it up to question and answers. So the final approach that I want to share with you is to tell stories. And I've pretty much been doing that my whole talk. I've been making analogies and comparisons. When I put up that circumstances bubble and talked about rape or poverty, I made analogies to born people in order to get my point across. Another analogy we can use is when it comes to illegal abortion. Some people will say that if abortions happen, if they're made illegal, women will do it anyways, and they may get infections or die in the process of committing illegal abortions. Well, the analogy or comparison we can use to make the point that we don't change the law anyways is to say the following. If a man has broken, swollen, bruised, bloody knuckles because he was beating his wife, should we give him boxing gloves so that next time he beats her, he doesn't hurt himself? Of course not. Because what brings about his harm? The infliction of harm on another. And we don't facilitate bad behavior. As tragic as it would be for a woman to be hurt or even killed from an illegal abortion, we have to ask ourselves, what would bring about her harm? As we just saw visually, the infliction of harm on another. And we can't facilitate that behavior. One of the issues that I'm finding more and more common in the abortion debate is a concern about suffering. People who support abortion will say, we don't want people suffering. If a child's going to be abused, if it's going to be neglected and unwanted or have some very painful physical deformity, it's better to have an abortion than bring a child into the world who will have a low quality of life. And my response is that in the face of suffering, we need to alleviate suffering, not eliminate sufferers. We need to alleviate suffering, not eliminate sufferers. If we think about people who inspire us, people we know or people in history, maybe characters in movies we've watched or books we've read, if we think about people who lift our spirits and challenge us to want to be better people, I bet you anything the common denominator, if we had time to share who inspires us, the common denominator would be people who inspire us do hard things. People who inspire us suffer. They face some obstacle, some hardship. And the whole reason they inspire us and other people don't is that in the face of suffering, they don't give up. In the face of obstacles, they look at how they can turn it into an opportunity. I'd like to share with you the story of someone who inspires me, someone I mentioned a little bit earlier in my talk. That someone is Nick Vujicic, the guy born without arms and legs. He came to Calgary a few months ago, and having told his story a lot for several years, and all my staff and interns and students that I work with know about him, and when I heard he was coming to Calgary, I thought, I need to somehow find a way for him to meet the staff. And through a connection of a connection, we managed to secure lunch with Nick on a Sunday afternoon, and he spent the afternoon with our team. Well, our staff knew he was coming, but our interns didn't. And when he came in, we surprised them with him. They were so shocked, like their jaws were practically on the floor. They were so shocked. Nick was laughing. He goes, well, you know, I'm really not Nick Vujicic. I'm his stunt double. Anyways, what I want to do before opening it up to Q&A is play for you a brief clip from an interview with Nick. And then I'll conclude by showing how we can take his message of facing suffering and turning that obstacle into an opportunity, how we can take that and apply it to the pro-life message.
It's an overworked word, but there's no other way to describe Nick Vujicic. He really is inspiring. Nick was born without arms or legs. And when he tells the story of his birth, the shock, the confusion suffered by his parents, he'll have you in tears. Growing up wasn't all that much fun either. So how did this poor little Aussie kid do so well? Become school captain, go to uni, get a double degree, and set himself up in a really great job. That's the story we're about to tell. A message of hope that's helped teenagers all over the world cope with their problems. A message you'll never forget.
You should jump in, mate.
Nick Vujicic was born with no legs and no arms.
I'm going out on a limb. What do you want?
But he's sure got plenty of guts.
This is scary right here, mate. This is where you gotta have guts. Or you're a bit crazy.
This 25-year-old Australian is climbing over every obstacle life puts in front of him, and he's doing it with style.
You really can do anything, can't you? There's no harm in believing so.
Everybody's going through something. You know, we're all going through something, just my pain is a bit more visible than yours or somebody else. When that clicked, it was like a light bulb when, you know, just flashed in my brain. I'm like, hey, now life I see as an opportunity. This circumstance, there's got to be something good.
No arms, no legs.
No worries, mate.
So do you see yourself as a disabled person?
I know I have no arms, no legs, but the definition of disability is something stopping you from being able to do something. In my life, there's hardly anything I've found that I can't do.
Even golf.
Even golf.
I think we're getting a bit out of control here.
Should I take over?
No. Nick is an inspiration. Phenomenal passion for life that's intoxicating for everyone who meets him.
Nice. Give me 5, man. I feel like I'm enjoying life and my life more than the average person out there. That I'm achieving more things than the average 25-year-old. It's great. I'm fulfilling my dreams, man.
Those dreams brought Nick to America 18 months ago. In a short time, he's become a smash hit as a preacher and motivational speaker.
Welcome, Nick Wojcik.
The secret to his success here is his Aussie accent and the ability to laugh at his lot in life.
Yeah, when you see me from the outside of a vehicle, you have no idea that I have no limbs. And we're at the traffic lights and this car comes up next to us and this girl is looking at me. So I look at her, she looks at me and I'm like, cool, let's have some fun here. I grab the seatbelt in my mouth and I loosen it like this. And then in the car seat, I just did this.
Humour underpins everything to you. Humour in your message.
You know, if I start feeling sorry for myself, then I know that you know, if I've got a sad face, oh, poor guy, you know. But if they see a guy, you know, who's able to joke about himself, you know, it's good to laugh once in a while, mate. It's a good relief. It's really, I mean, to be able to laugh at life, that's what I've found that I can now accomplish. Less body surface. My skin is more sensitive than other people's, and yeah, it definitely gives me that sense of touch as well, for sure. It's quite funny having half the blood volume in my body. Everything hits me twice as hard as well. So if it's sugar, caffeine, or alcohol, you know, it hits me twice as hard. So.
Whiling away some time on the water gives Nick a sense of control and independence.
You good?
Very good. Very impressive.
Look at that. That is perfect.
Well done.
That's all right, eh?
Yep.
Be able to drive a Manly ferry soon. It's something he's always craved. As a teenager, he was determined to do things his way to lighten the burden on his parents. These days, his life is so busy, he's had to employ a full-time carer to speed up the process.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Thank you very much.
But he doesn't need anyone to help him with his emails.
Do you pray for arms and legs?
Every now and then I do. I do pray for arms and legs. You know, I do have faith that God can, right now, in front of us, just, you know, come down with his light or whatever and bang, I have arms and legs. But the joy of having no limbs and being able to be used in such a unique way and powerful way for people, like, you can't give me any amount of money to even consider taking a magical pill to have arms and legs right now.
You can't give me any amount of money to consider taking a magical pill to give me arms and legs right now. Nick couldn't always say that. At the age of 10, he tried to commit suicide. He tried to drown himself by rolling over in the family's bathtub. Now, thankfully, he didn't succeed at that. And after going through a period of great suffering and persecution from other kids in school and other people treating him badly because he was different, he came to the realization that his suffering put him in a unique position to empathize with those who were also suffering and to help them find purpose and find meaning in their life even when they face obstacles. To show them that no matter whatever hardship we face, that instead of giving up, we need to rise above that situation that we're in. Nick was supposed to leave us to go get his hair cut, because after our lunch, he was going to get his hair cut because he had more speaking, traveling to do in the weeks following. And he had met a woman 2 days before who was a hairdresser. She came to his talk, and she had mentioned she was a hairdresser, and he said, "Oh, can you cut my hair on Sunday?" Well, he was having so much fun with us, I guess. He said to his assistant, "Tell the hairdresser to come here. I'll get my hair cut at their office." I thought, that's weird. Is that code for something? Like, is he really getting his hair cut? Well, when the hairdresser arrived, I understood why he told her to come to our office. The hairdresser didn't come alone. She came with her family, which included her daughter, Brooke. Brooke was born without arms. As it says on her t-shirt, "Who needs arms when I have God?" When Brooke's mom was pregnant, the ultrasound came out detecting that she had no arms, and the doctors offered abortion. Brooke's parents refused. Brooke's mom went home, went on to Google and typed, "no arms," enter. Nick Vujicic videos came up. And the rest of her pregnancy, she spent watching his videos. And when Brooke was born, and all the way through to Brooke being 2.5, Brooke would sit and she would watch Nick on video. And they drove hours through the mountains to get to Calgary to meet Nick in person. Nick's disability gives him an ability to reach out to people like Brooke in a way you and I can't. And in the same way, that unplanned, unwanted, undesirable pregnancy gives that girl an opportunity to reach out to the preborn child who needs her in a very unique way. Just as Nick has an ability to help Brooke in a way you and I can't, that pregnant girl has an ability to help the preborn child in the way that we can't. Nick finds his purpose and hope and meaning in life by shifting his focus from himself towards the other. And that's ultimately what we as pro-lifers need to instill in our culture, to get that girl and everyone to shift their focus from themselves towards the other, that preborn child. And the mystery of self-sacrifice, the mystery of love, is that when we put others first, that's where we find our true joy. That's where we find our happiness. God bless you.